Welcome to episode 2 of Healthy Mind, Fit Body podcast. This is Wes Bertrand, and I'm doing a show by myself this week. Kevin will definitely be on for episode 3. As you might already know by listening to the bonus audio or the first podcast, I am providing some of the psychological insights for the Healthy Mind, Fit Body equation. And the purpose of this podcast is to expand on the 3 pillars that we outlined in the bonus audio. And in case you missed that, just go to the website and opt in to get that and the free newsletter and updates that we have for the show. But just a brief sketch, the 3 pillars consist of having the right nutritional knowledge and having the insights into yourself, so having the self-knowledge. And the 3rd pillar would be the motivation, which is the emotional component to getting to your optimal weight and living a healthy life in the process. And of course, these 3 pillars are really expanded on in our book that we have, the title of which is Healthy Mind, Fit Body, subtitled How the Mind-Body Connection Can Help You Achieve Your Perfect Weight. And you can find a link to that on our website also. And by weight, we mean the ideal body fat percentage for yourself to be healthy and to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So I thought for this podcast, we could go back to childhood and explore how it is that most Americans are really leading unhealthy lives in terms of their nutrition and how they deal with themselves. And I've spent a lot of time over the years looking at the history of psychology, the history of philosophy, and the history of politics and so forth. And I've written a couple books on liberty, freedom, personal freedom, and political freedom and so forth. So I'm pretty keen on these issues. And the idea is that cause the world to be not so free. And what we experience during childhood is kind of a precursor to what we experience as adults in terms of our lack of freedom and the lack of self-responsibility that people, especially in politics, play in society. So here in San Diego, we're exploring creating a school that is based on personal freedom in an educational environment. And the model we're looking at is called the Sudbury Valley School. And I've been reading this book called The Sudbury Valley School Experience, and it gets its name from the first school created back in the 70s, I believe, and it has continued to present day, and there are a number of schools, dozens in fact, throughout the United States that implement these principles, which basically are radical in the sense that they deviate from the status quo. The traditional model of how kids are supposed to learn is to listen to a teacher and obey teacher and do what is required of them to take a course and get the passing grade and move on to the next class. And it's very regimented, and it actually comes from the Prussian model way back when in Germany. And it was designed to train people to be either good soldiers or good factory workers, not to be creative, high self-esteeming, independent and assertive, confident and courageous people, but rather obedient followers. So when kids are encouraged to not make their own choices and not be responsible and to follow an authority figure that tells them what to do, we can misplace our ability to set our own course and to take on challenges in our life with an effective mindset or efficacious perspective, to feel that we're able to cope with the challenges presented to us, whether it's the kind of life we pursue, the career, the job, or the kind of foods that we eat, and how that's reflected in our self-concept and self-image and so forth. So what I'd like to do is read a section in this book. It's from an essay within it titled Learning to Trust Oneself by Alan White. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just the parts that I thought were really pertinent to the healthy mind, fit body perspective. And of course, I'll have some comments at the end to kind of wrap things up here. So Alan White wrote, "The accomplishments of young children up to the age of 5 are remarkable and have been acknowledged by many before me. They learn to sit up, to crawl, to stand up, to walk, to gain command of spoken language, even several languages, among other things, and since almost all babies accomplish these enormously difficult tasks, we are not as awed by their accomplishments as we should be. Rather than recognizing how successful they have been at teaching themselves tasks that would be very difficult for any adult, we have gotten the idea that when they are 4 or 5, we can now take over their education and really teach them all the, quote, important things that they will need to know to be a successful and productive adult. And to skip ahead here, he wrote, "Perhaps the most important disservice adults make in attempting to help children learn is to try to substitute the adult's knowledge for the child's own feedback system, which was so successful in the earliest years. It takes away self-reliance and replaces it with, quote, expert opinion. The child often becomes passive, confused, even angry. From earliest infancy, children develop their own criteria about what works and what does not. They constantly test new input against the feedback provided by their nervous system in order to correct and transform their criteria until they feel they have things right, at least for a time, at their particular stage of development. For example, their use of language in a family setting may need to be transformed when they try to communicate to others as their circle of contacts expands into the larger community, and the feedback they receive as the circle expands helps them transform the language. Take something as basic as eating. Even the youngest of babies know when they are hungry and will drink their mother's milk until they have satisfied their hunger. In experiments conducted over 40 years ago, and actually it's about 55 given the printing of this book in 1992, to find out what kind of diet young toddlers would choose for themselves, a smorgasbord of dishes were provided. This research concluded that, although children would often eat bizarre meals at any one occasion, over a month's time their food intake was well balanced. An adult population that is grossly overweight, that has to resort to bypass surgery to try to compensate for clogged arteries later in life, a population where heart attacks are one of the leading causes of early death, and where mobility is seriously curtailed by deteriorating muscles, is hardly in a position to substitute their knowledge of what is good for anyone to eat or to how to care for oneself. Even for that minority of parents who are health conscious, it is a mistake to rob children of the ability to develop their own criteria for good eating and caring for themselves. Normal, healthy children are not self-destructive. They do not walk over cliffs or expose themselves to known danger. Now, it is true that they may, in their inexperience, expose themselves to an unknown danger, and we cannot let them experiment by eating poison or walking out in front of an oncoming car. But it is the rule and not the exception that should be followed. We should allow children to develop their own criteria for what is right for them whenever possible. Like many of my contemporaries, I have been struggling with an overeating problem over the years, and I have become increasingly aware of the roots of my dilemma. I am tempted to eat when I am anxious or when I am restless. I feel compelled to finish whatever is served. I also feel starved when my customary time of eating approaches. I have had a sense for some time now that all of these feelings about food are only partly related to any real need for nourishment. I also know that people can fast for days or even weeks without losing energy or feeling starved. It is only recently that I have begun to focus in on the problem. I began by fasting for 3 days, paying particular attention to my feelings of hunger and how my body was responding. Once I had made up my mind that I was going to start a fast, I did not feel particularly hungry at mealtimes, so I think that, like Pavlov's dogs, I have been conditioned to eat at certain hours of the day. Parents tell us that eating at scheduled times is for our own good, but it turns out it is for their convenience. The one who has to prepare food should be considered, but it should be stated that way and not passed off as something that is good for the child. When people we trust and depend on deceive us, it teaches us to discredit the messages we are receiving from our nervous system. Now that I am paying careful attention to when I am hungry, I am finding out that I am much more relaxed, eat more slowly, I am eating much less, and I am not eating just because I am anxious or nervous. So then he goes on to explain his life on the farm and how they had these pets, domesticated animals that they raised and then slaughtered for food, and it was pretty traumatizing for him, and he subsequently became a vegetarian.